Welcome to the National Security Lecture Series. My name is Mark Evans and I'm the Director of the Australia-New Zealand School of Government's Institute for Governance here at the University of Canberra. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to host this lunchtime lecture. As is our custom, can I begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of this land on which we are meeting, and pay respect to the elders of the Ngunnawal nation, both past and present. I extend this respect to all Indigenous people in attendance here today. I would like to begin by inviting the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Canberra, Professor Stephen Parker, to introduce today's speaker. Stephen.
Thank you, Mark. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a further lecture in the National Security series of lectures. It's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome Mr. Michael Carmody, the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service, to the University of Canberra. Mr. Carmody is a vastly experienced public servant, and as we're reminded almost every day, he has a difficult and demanding job. His service is required to regulate the movement of all people and goods across Australia's borders. When you think of the size of Australia, you can understand just how demanding a task that is. The Customs and Border Protection Service is a key element of Australia's emerging national security community, and individually and collectively makes a vital contribution to Australia's national security. It works closely with other government and international agencies such as the Australian Federal Police, the Australian Quarantine and Inspection Service, the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, and the Department of Defence to detect and deter the unlawful movement of goods and people across our borders. In December 2008, as part of the new national security arrangements, Customs was renamed and given additional responsibilities to respond to the growing threat to our borders due to maritime people smuggling. To achieve this new mission, it's taken on new roles such as intelligence collection and analysis, surveillance, and maritime response options. As well as these additional duties, it's required to adapt to meet the challenges of real and emerging threats such as terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, drug trafficking, and transnational criminal activities. So, as all of this will tell you, Customs and Border Protection is a frontline agency which operates in real time, in difficult, demanding, and often dangerous environments, and often in the centre of a considerable media spotlight. Mr. Carmody has been the CEO of Customs since 2006. Prior to this, he was Commissioner of Taxation. During his time as CEO, he has met the responsibilities of dealing with the immediate problems of securing our borders, and in addition, he's had the considerable task of adopting new roles and shaping and building the service for the future. His success in these tasks can be seen in the fact that in January of this year, he was reappointed to the role for a further 5-year period. Today, I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank him for his support to the university through participating in our Work Integrated Learning programme. Last year, Ms. Emma Wanell, one of our national security students, participated in a very successful internship placement with Customs and Border Protection. And we're very appreciative of your support for this programme, which helps us differentiate the University of Canberra as a place where we can truly prepare our students for their professional careers. Thank you for joining us today, and I invite you to address the audience.
Well, good afternoon and thank you. And just stole half my speech explaining the role of Customs and Border Protection in national security. Many of you, however, might have had other images of Customs. If you go back to the earliest antecedents of our role, and you go back to actually 1799, where we had the first customs activity was conducted, and that was the imposition of excise which was an effort by the colonial government to not only control the distribution of liquor but also to raise funds. Early proceeds of that paid for the building of Sydney's first prison, hospital and a bridge over the Tank Stream. By the 1890s, colonial customs departments were collecting 90% of government revenue, and in many ways that was and still is the role of many customs administrations around the world. So it's sort of an interesting question for another day as to how customs evolved into the sort of organisation that you heard about when I was introduced. However, I did find one seed of that emergence, because from the start we were responsible for prohibited imports. Now, we're not talking here about weapons of mass destruction or other items like that, but in fact, at the earliest time of the Customs Administration, we were responsible for ensuring that exhausted tea and tea adulterated with spurious leaf or with exhausted leaves or being unfit for human use or unwholesomeness was not allowed to get to the people of Australia. So there you go. We started small leaf tea and emerged into the organisation that we are today. So it's my pleasure to be here today and just take you through a little bit about the role of Customs and Border Protection, touch on how it's evolved, talk about the environment we operate within, talk about our responses to that environment, and then touch on some of the issues that have been raised in a national security context. Now, as you've heard, we do have a fairly broad role at the border. And we have an outcome statement, a touch bureaucratic, but it perhaps explains that role, and that is the protection of the safety, security and commercial interests of Australians through border protection designed to support legitimate trade and travel and to ensure collection of border revenue and trade statistics. Now, as you can see, that's quite a broad role, and in many ways, if you want to think about us in many sort of corporate or managerial terms, we're a bit like a conglomerate. We're a conglomerate that operates in a wide area of products and activities where the locus of those operations is the border, as distinct from sort of a vertically integrated organisation that goes into great depth. So one of the important things, well, if you think about it, you know, we operate a mini Coast Guard, we collect revenue, we provide industry assistance, we facilitate people through airports and so on. And that's distinct from the operation of the other. But what it does say is that as an organisation, the issues we deal with are rarely our own to deal with. I'm often asked what's the difference between my role as Commissioner of Taxation and my role as the Chief Executive of Customs and Border Protection. Now, there's many answers I could give to that, but the overwhelming one is that as Commissioner of Taxation, you were a vertically integrated organisation. You virtually had all the levers that were going to impact on revenue collection and compliance. In my role, it is critically important that I work with a whole range of international, local law enforcement agencies, intelligence agency, quarantine service, immigration and so on, to enable us to perform our role effectively at the border. As was mentioned in the introduction, the role into national security was really affirmed in the then Prime Minister's National Security Statement in December 2008, which really embraced border integrity in its broader sense as a true national security policy issue. As part of that, the Australian Customs Service was renamed to the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service, and that really saw an evolution that had started more strongly with the events of 9/11. Now, the point is we do not claim to be the central policy of national security. We don't even claim to be, you know, the lead operational agency in national security. However, through our presence at the passenger, cargo, maritime and coastal surveillance environments, we operate in those domains that play an important role on national security issues. And what we bring to the national security table are important capabilities. Primary amongst these are rich information sources, analytical and targeting capabilities, industry knowledge, extensive powers, and surveillance and response and detection capabilities. Importantly, as I've already mentioned, we bring extensive experience in collaborating with others here and overseas to achieve results. Now, if you think about the border environment, there are many challenges that could take a long time to discuss, but let me just illustrate some of those. A key driver of our approaches is, for example, that between now and 2020, the total number of passengers entering Australia is expected to rise from around 12 million to 20 million per year, with similar number increase for those departing Australia. Cargo movements are also expected to increase by almost double over the same period. In addition to these increases in volumes, globalisation is increasing the complexity of supply chains and travel routes. This complexity increases the number of transit and transshipment points, making it even harder to determine the true origins of people or goods on their way to Australia. We will continue to face a number of security threats. The threats faced in relation to terrorism, organised crime, people smuggling are just three that are likely to endure for the foreseeable future. The increasing sophistication of technology will provide opportunities for enhanced law enforcement and delivery on our part. However, it also provides opportunities for those that look to circumvent border controls as they adapt to new technology. We also need to be aware that we are operating in an environment of limited resources. An ageing population, tightening labour markets will challenge us into the future. There are already high expectations of the community of what border protection encompasses. The other reality that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is that typically at the border we have very short intervention times. So if you think about it, if you've travelling from London or Rome or somewhere else and you've been travelling for 24 hours or more, when you get to an Australian airport, your level of tolerance for queues and how long it's going to take you to get out of the airport diminishes significantly. And we, in our operations, we deal with basically 99-point-something% of the time we're dealing with legitimate people, genuine travellers, genuine residents, legitimate goods, products. And we have to operate in a way that supports the Australian economy. We can't hold up goods indefinitely, we can't hold up people indefinitely. And that is one of the critical drivers, along with increasing volumes, of our development of our approaches to border protection. So our response to that sort of environment at a strategic level is threefold. First of all, we recognise that the issues we confront at the border often require an integrated response from a range of agencies, and we do seek to show leadership in collaborating to achieve this result. Secondly, we operate across what we refer to as the border continuum, so that our responses start offshore in seeking to prevent risks arising, or if we can't do that, at least obtaining information that enables us to target people or goods as they're entering the country. And thirdly, we employ an increasingly intelligence-led and risk-based approach to our operations, supported by assurance and disruption activities. So if I take collaboration at the border as the first of our strategic responses, I guess the manifestation of the move towards collaboration was evident in the development of what was called the Strategic Border Management Plan. And that was the development coordinated by 13 agencies led by us in Customs and Border Protection, but which saw those agencies come together, look to the future challenges, and set out the principles for border management, the key challenges we face, and how we plan to work together to deal with those challenges at the border. At a practical level, we recognise that no single agency, as I've mentioned, can deal with these challenges alone. As a result, Customs and Border Protection continues to operate closely with a number of border and law enforcement agencies to address the risks at the border. These partnerships, used to address both operational and policy requirements, allow border agencies to coordinate strategic policy decisions and leverage resources so that we can focus our interventions based on intelligence and risk. There are dozens of joint law enforcement task forces operating at any one time, working together to protect the border at an operational level. This brings the joint capabilities of agencies such as Customs and Border Protection, the Australian Federal Police, State and Territory Police and the Australian Crime Commission together to combat organised crime. The approach to countering maritime people smuggling ventures, which I'll touch on later, is another example of a joint approach to addressing complex border challenges. This joint effort also extends beyond the direct operational regime, and we in Customs and Border Protection chair the Border Management Group consisting of 12 border agencies. This group is responsible for implementing the Strategic Border Management Plan I spoke about just previously and coordinating strategic responses. Second key approach we've adopted is what I call the border continuum. And this really comes from the reality I talked about the short intervention times we have at the border. So, by the border continuum, this starts often in partnership with others overseas, where we work with other countries to strengthen border controls, we support agencies engaged in disrupting people smuggling ventures, and we obtain and analyse data to target our interventions at the border. Stepping one step closer in the maritime zone and territorial waters, we identify and intercept possible people smuggling, illegal foreign fishing and drug importation ventures through surveillance and response assets coordinated by Border Protection Command, which operates within Customs and Border Protection. The third level is at the border itself, where we identify and present the risks at the physical entry and exit points to Australia to prevent the illegal movement of people or goods across the border. And then within Australia, we reinforce and operate to deter by conducting often joint investigations of those that have been involved in trying to breach our borders. So collectively, that's what we refer to as the border continuum. And we recognise that there is a need to work ahead of the border so that checking and screening commences well before people, cargo and vessels cross the physical border. The layered risk-based approach is a process that begins long before people or goods depart from Australia. Border clearance processes are pushed back as far as possible to the point of origin. Capacity building and cooperation activities with overseas authorities can help to prevent risks flowing through to Australia by identifying suspect individuals or goods at the earliest point. The next level that I talked about was that of intelligence-led and risk-based. And here, again, we recognise that the majority of travellers of goods that arrive present a low risk, and we need to adopt a risk-based approach. Irrespective of anything else, if you think about the sort of numbers and the growth in numbers that I've talked about of passengers and goods, if we were to adopt any other approach of attempting to X-ray every good or examine every person coming into the country, we would either employ half the country to look at the other half of the country, or we would hold up travellers and goods. It is not a feasible approach to operations, and that's what leads us to this key element of being intelligence-led and risk-based. Prior to a traveller arriving to Australia, for example, at Australia's border, we do a pre-arrival risk assessment involving a wide range of data sources to achieve that. We do have access, and I've mentioned risk sources of information, we have access to the vast bulk of all reservation and travel information of people before they depart Australia by air to this country. Using that and other techniques enables us to undertake a pre-arrival risk assessment. That assessment then enables us to target those people who we believe we need to examine further when they arrive at the border. Similarly, in the cargo vein, we get cargo information well before any cargo comes and reaches our ports, prior to arriving at Australian ports. And again, this enables us to do a risk-based targeting of those containers and others that we want to examine. The ability to maintain knowledge of activity occurring in the maritime domain, undertaking surveillance and patrols, and where necessary responding when Australia's interests are threatened, is another key controlling part of the border. At the physical border, we consider a secondary layer of intervention. We work to identify and prevent risks. So in addition to the pre-arrival risk analysis we take to identify, there are a range of other layers of techniques that we employ, so that passengers can be questioned and observed at immigration line and in the baggage hall at airports. Other capabilities such as detector dogs, X-rays, trace detection technology can also be employed. Increasingly, biometric technology is also being employed. Depending on such factors as the level of intelligence available, the results of container X-rays, cargo containers may be unpacked and subject to physical examination or X-ray. Our risk approaches are backed up by sampling and campaign activities, and this is important. We are enhancing our risk-based approaches. We seek to enhance our intelligence gathering, but we need to be careful that we don't become so narrow and buried in those that we are overconfident in our ability. So one of the things that we do is that in addition to the targeted activities, we will undertake sampling activity where particular containers will be X-rayed or examined. The reason for that is to enable us to analyse whether in fact our targeting is effective or whether there's something emerging we're not working. The other element that we do is we conduct campaigns. And this will be a campaign on a particular activity. It might be on, for a particular period, looking at supplies put on vessels. We undertake those sort of campaign in what are seen to be low-risk activities, one, to make sure there aren't risks emerging, but secondly, to be a little bit unpredictable. One of the points I'll touch on later, those seeking to breach our border are looking at what we're doing. And it's important that we don't become that predictable that it enables them to develop their approaches. Turn now to those are some of the capabilities and directions we bring. Turn now to our role in a range of national security issues that were mentioned in the then Prime Minister's National Security Statement. Obviously, the area of terrorism remains a high agenda for all agencies. We are not, of course, a lead agency in countering terrorism, but our capabilities in analysing border-related reporting, in intervention and assessment, and in providing physical surveillance and response in the aviation and maritime environment can support those agencies that have a key role in this area. And two relatively recent terrorism incidents illustrate our current and emerging contributions. You'll be aware that in December, a 23-year-old Nigerian national aboard Northwest Airlines flight from Amsterdam to Detroit detonated an improvised explosive device. He was restrained by passengers on board and, fortunately, the flight and the aircraft landed safely. Very shortly after that, the Australian government announced a package of measures to strengthen Australia's international and domestic aviation security regime against emerging threats. As part of this, Customs and Border Protection, with its partner agency, the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, are continuing to develop a range of improvement opportunities to our passenger risk assessment through what we call the Enhanced Passenger Risk Assessment Program. Under these measures, we're looking to enhance the collection, storage and use of advanced passenger information to expand our current capability and to support multi-agency decision-making and passenger risk assessment. The important element there is it's not just us that you can utilise this information, it's how we link this with information held by intelligence, by DIAC and others to give us a comprehensive view of a risk or a threat, and increasingly one that looks to before people depart to arrive to Australia. The second incident was the October Yemeni air cargo bomb plot. Following that incident, the Australian government moved immediately to increase security screening on cargo. This included a requirement by the Office of Transport Security that industry screen all cargo originating or passing through Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Doha. Customs and Border Protection initially undertook that screening on behalf of industry because of the capabilities that we had available to us. The response was subsequently refined based on a clearer understanding of the threat, and then it was directed particularly at cargo originating or passing through Yemen. In this context, I should note, however, that all air cargo entering Australia is assessed by Customs and Border Protection against a range of threats, including terrorism. This risk assessment is air cargo guided by a range of intelligence products and risk assessments, and indeed, even before that incident, we had targeted Yemeni cargo as one that needed to be closely inspected. In the area of counter-proliferation, Australia is a member or signatory of a wide range of treaties and international agreements and various multinational non-proliferation and export control regimes, things like the Chemical Weapons Convention, Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, Biological Weapons Convention and so on. And by and large, these items are reflected in what's called the Defence Strategic Goods list of items, for which permission is required from the Minister for Defence before they can be exported. Now, while the Department of Defence administers this permit regime, it is us in Customs and Border Protection that is responsible for enforcing the prohibitions on those exports. And these, again, require a number of risk-based and assessments, because often what's involved are goods that can be used for the sort of issues we're concerned about, but can also be used for legitimate purposes, so-called dual-use goods. So you need to add to the nature of the goods information about who's exporting them, who's importing them, and other information that you might have, so that a decision can be taken as to whether they can be allowed out of the country. Now, one of the other issues that was mentioned by the then Prime Minister in his national security statement was elevating the impact of serious and organised transnational crime as a national security issue. Now, organised crime is, of course, a diverse area. Goods moved by organised criminal networks includes such things as illicit drugs and precursor chemicals, counterfeit goods and so on. Now, the networks that perpetrate the more serious level of transnational crime can be characterised as somewhat flexible, dynamic, innovative and resilient. Driven by profit motive, these networks are opportunistic, risk-averse and commonly maintain multi-jurisdictional and transnational presence. And they may be involved in multiple illicit activities at any given time. There is no doubt that transnational organised criminals will continue to adapt with new and emerging technologies which provide opportunities to increase the sophistication of organised criminal offending. They will continue to be dynamic and move into markets and places where profits are to be made and where they perceive risks to their operations to be lower. Serious and organised crime, as I said, has only been recently recognised as a national security priority. But it too is the centre of a whole-of-government framework represented by the Commonwealth Organised Crime Strategic Framework led by the Attorney-General's Department, which brings together and provides a strategic context for the law enforcement and regulatory agencies to respond to organised crime. It starts with a strategic organised crime threat assessment and then moves into a criminal response plan that's being implemented through multi-agency approaches. Coordinated responses and widespread sharing of information and intelligence are valuable tools in the fight against organised crime. Some organised criminal networks operate like legitimate businesses. This includes investing in capabilities. Successful groups are able to use more sophisticated concealments, commit criminal activities on an increasingly large scale and work to lessen their business risks, such as through attempting to corrupt officials, infiltrate business involved in the supply chain and indeed employing their own counter-surveillance methods and technologies. And it is clear that established criminal groups do give a high priority to innovation in concealment. Just one example, and there are many over recent years, but in July 2009 saw over 140 kilograms of cocaine packed into machinery dyes. These are extensive, large metallic items, and concealed within them was the cocaine. And obviously it took the work of specialist engineers, including industrial tools and drills, to be able to detect that. In dealing with organised crimes, our efforts are driven by strong tactical and strategic intelligence. Part of this approach involves learning more about criminal entities rather than individual transactions at the border. And through the amount of information that we have through our presence around the country, through the sort of information we have on cargo, passengers and others, we are in a position to add to the intelligence holdings of other law enforcement agencies to build that picture of the business models and operations of criminal groups. And naturally, underlying all this are extensive information sharing arrangements with our partner agencies. And indeed, the key to our approaches to serious and organised transnational crime, to the extent it involves the border, is intelligence sharing and joint operations with law enforcement agencies. In detecting illicit drug and precursor importations, and of course many criminal groups, because of the profits involved, are involved in the drug trade, that clearly investigating those is primary responsibility of the AFP. However, we work very closely with them, and we also work closely with other partners, law enforcement agencies, including state and territory police, the New South Wales Crime Commission, the Australian Crime Commission. And indeed, at any one time, we can be involved in as many as 40 to 50 joint investigations. As I noted, importation of illicit drugs and precursor chemicals a particular focus, and a recent notable example of how this was brought together capabilities were brought together in a very short time was the operation off Queensland's southern coast late last year. This operation started with the intelligence lead from the US Drug Enforcement Administration to the Australian Federal Police. Within a very short time, we were able to bring together the capabilities of a range of agencies under which Customs and Border Protection worked with the Australian Federal Police, Queensland, New South Wales Police. And what that involved was one of our Customs and Border Protection vessels several hundred nautical miles off the coast intercepting a trimaran that had brought these drugs at the same concurrent time of the AFP working with us, working at the port of arrival of the sister vessels that brought those drugs into the country, and some 464 kilograms of cocaine was detected with a street value of around 160 million. I mention that one because it demonstrates the importance of intelligence leads, including internationally. It demonstrates the importance of people working together with a common focus, and it demonstrates the importance of speed and agility in doing that. Responding to maritime people smuggling is an issue for which we were given a particular operational leadership role in the 2008 National Security Statement. Our role includes leading a whole-of-government intelligence hub, drawing the resources of the Australian Federal Police, the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, the Department of Defence and other elements of the Australian intelligence community in the one location. This integration provides a consolidated whole-of-government understanding of the threat environment across strategic intelligence reporting, which we provide to ministers, operational intelligence reporting for decision-makers onshore and overseas, and tactical intelligence to support the investigation and disruption operations conducted by overseas agencies. We add to this by leading whole-of-government operational strategic planning. Through Border Protection Command, we provide Australia's civil maritime surveillance and response capability. The Border Protection Command is an operational authority, in concert with other government agencies, protects Australia's national interest in our maritime domain, both by generating awareness of activity and by responding to mitigate or eliminate the risks posed by maritime security threats. Border Protection Command is a multi-agency command which directly controls the assets assigned from the Australian Defence Force and Customs and Border Protection. Both surveillance and response craft come under their command. The Border Protection Command, commanded by a Rear Admiral seconded from Defence, who, as Commander, has operational control, as I've indicated, of both ADF and Customs and Border Protection's assets. Given Customs and Border Protection's primary responsibility for border protection in the civil domain, then in this civil maritime operations, Border Protection Command reports on a day-to-day basis to us in Customs and Border Protection. In the context of the maritime people smuggling, this capability operates to detect and intercept ventures headed for Australia. Generally, interception can only occur at law once a vessel enters our contiguous zone. That is broadly 24 nautical miles from landfall. Due to our proximity to those countries for which people smuggling ventures are known to launch or transit through, we often have a small window of opportunity to detect and intercept ventures headed for Australia. Just to give one example, Christmas Island is over 1,000 nautical miles from Broome, but only about 200 nautical miles from parts of Indonesia. A vessel can transit that distance in approximately 24 hours. To add to that, our northern exclusive economic zone, where the largest threat from maritime people smuggling is posed, is approximately 500,000 square nautical miles, or an area equal to the size of Queensland. Clearly then, the surveillance we undertake and the positioning of assets that we employ in this task have to be, again, intelligence-led and risk-based. But of course, maritime people smuggling is only one threat we have to deal with in the maritime environment. Border Protection Command is responsible for coordinating and controlling operations to protect Australia's natural interest against a range of maritime security threats. These include the illegal exploitation of natural resources, illegal activity in protected areas, irregular maritime arrivals, prohibited imports and exports, maritime terrorism and pollution where we play a support role, piracy, robbery and compromise to biosecurity. As noted, Australia is responsible for one of the largest maritime jurisdictions in the world. The border protection challenges are magnified by the sheer size of our maritime domain and the diversity of the conditions. As I've said, operations are necessarily based and targeted on a risk basis. And while obviously maritime people smuggling is the highest threat with which we're dealing at the moment, some of you may recall that in mid-2000, indeed the highest maritime security threat was illegal foreign fishing in our northern waters, which was a very high-profile issue. Strong on-water enforcement action combined with in-country communication campaigns turned this around successfully. The deterrent effect of ongoing enforcement efforts over recent years has maintained this to the point where you can see on maps that we could provide, large concentrations of fishing vessels just north of the line that divides our waters from those of Indonesia economic zone. In the aviation environment, it too presents another diverse range of challenges, but is also a good example of how a range of government agencies, industry participants and the broader Australian community are all working together on a day-to-day operational basis, as well as in a strategic way. There is no doubt, as I've already mentioned, that the continuing growth in international travel from new and existing markets, together with the emergence of different aviation business models, is challenging for us. In this context, the contrast between the simple linear movement of a person through an airport and the highly complex systems, both from an industry and a government context, that supports that movement is striking. Despite short-term interruptions, aviation passenger demand remains strong, and this growth trend is likely to continue into the future. Issues such as fluctuating oil prices, interest rates, the continuing effects of the global economic crisis are influencing the way airlines are looking to develop efficiencies. This includes investment in larger aircraft, which can increase the peak loads of passengers processed at certain times, and the current popularity of low-cost carrier model, which are expected to increasingly operate out of new localities. All of these factors impact significantly on our business. In terms of the complexity of risk, increasing passenger numbers now come from both traditional and emerging markets. Adding another level of complexity are airport infrastructure upgrades, which are complex, costly and take years to plan and complete. Historically, the focus has been on identifying passengers for examination on arrival at the border. As noted already, however, we are moving to analysis that, once mature, could better support the need for interventions prior to the arrival of a passenger to Australia. Investment is underway on measures to strengthen passenger and air security by ensuring we can better analyse and share advanced passenger information. This will enable more timely and better informed decisions to be made about the interventions we need both before and at the border. There is considerable value we can extract from working with our international partners, learning from overseas experience in that. In order to exploit the ever-expanding pool of information in the most timely and effective way, there must be better collection and storage of data for assessment, as well as a better focus on intelligence. Over a period of time, we've been steadily increasing the range of passenger data we are able to use to make assessments about the need for intervention. We've also been enhancing our ability to use that data and any intelligence and information we have in different ways to improve that assessment capability. We are improving our collection and storage of passenger data and building both an ability to appropriately share that data with other border and law enforcement agencies and an ability to engage in improved entity analytics and data pattern analysis. We do want to better anticipate the evolving intentions and tactics of those who seek to breach our border. Cooperative, coordinated and consultative relationships here and overseas will provide the basis to share information and intelligence. In turn, this will enable us to take our actions collectively. As you can see from my overview both of the maritime and aviation domains, we place a high value on intelligence as one of the tools to help us secure the nation and its border. Another tool is technology, and while those seeking to breach our border use technology to assist them in their endeavours, we are using the same advances in technology to help us prepare for the future. Already, technology has enabled us to better anchor a person's identity, reducing the risk of identity fraud. We do have automated, what we call smart gate, automated passenger processing at airports, which use facial recognition, and we're able to deploy fraudulent document readers. CCV technology is employed extensively at airports and at seaports. Our container examination facilities provide a capability to undertake X-ray of large sea containers to detect possible irregularities for further examination. And an example of the effectiveness of that was in October again of last year at our Sydney container examination facility. 168 kilograms of heroin was detained, concealed rather effectively inside wooden doors. This detection involved almost 60 million worth of drugs being kept off the streets. As we keep abreast of industry development, always exploring opportunities to improve facilitation through the integration of border processing requirements and normal business requirements is obviously a priority. Behind the scenes, technology side of our risk assessment processes is undergoing now significant planning with the intention for significant upgrades. This will allow us to better, in effect, join the dots, leading to the discovery of illicit activity from among the masses of data we are required to deal with as part of the modern environment, much of which constitutes legitimate trade and travel. Information management strategies and the systems will help us to make fast and accurate determinations. We are looking to build common enterprise architecture and data standards and to link into similar activities occurring across the Commonwealth so that we can act as a whole. Looking to the future, we've come a long way in a relatively short period, but obviously there is more that we need to do as part of the national security community. This does not mean displacing the expertise of individual agencies such as my own, but rather making sure that they are brought together in a coordinated fashion to direct resources and capabilities towards areas where the best outcomes can be achieved, maximising our investment and ensuring the most effective approach is being applied to a long-term problem. Like all, we need to continue to look for smarter ways of doing business. This will be achieved by building upon our intelligence-led and risk-based interventions, and we need to ensure our vital corporate support areas operate leanly and efficiently. With the expansion of border agencies' role in the national security community, we've been working to refocus our intelligence capability to enhance our ability to access and use sensitive national security information and produce strategic intelligence on broader protection issues. We will be working, as we have, but more intensively, with agencies in the Australian intelligence community, enhancing our approach to the development of analysts and developing the appropriate analytical tools for them to work in a highly classified environment. Border agencies will be a part of this journey, complying with new whole-of-government standards for data sharing, that is, sharing of sensitive information on common information technology, communication systems and processes, so that analysts across relevant agencies have ready access to the information they need to do their job, rather than relying on elements of information being pushed to them. To this end, we are working with other agencies towards building an integrated national security information environment and providing more centralised information storage and management solutions within the intelligence community, obviously at all times respecting legal and other constraints. Increasingly, intelligence partnerships are providing for more effective joint operations and intelligence-led responses. Both management, border management and the Australian intelligence community are working together in national forums and in overseas locations. Over the coming years, national security and border security challenges will both increase, and the distinctions between these two concepts will become more blurred. The importance of complementary strategies operating overseas, in the maritime domain, at the physical border and domestically will become increasingly important to ensuring effective protection for the Australian community. Thank you very much for inviting me along today.
Thank you, Michael, for the most thought-provoking lecture. Unfortunately, Michael's going to have to move off quite quickly, but we've got time for a few questions. And I'm going to start by using my position as chair to ask you the first question. At the moment, we're doing a lot of work with the National Audit Office on public sector innovation, and your agency is constantly referenced as a major international and domestic exemplar in your area.
This wasn't paid for that question, by the way.
So the question is, despite the fact that the watchwords, in fact, the key words that underpin almost everything that you've said have been risk management, how you've been able to create a culture of innovation within your agency where so many other Commonwealth departments and agencies have failed?
Well, let me answer that question by not putting the bar too high. There's a lot more we can do to create the sort of innovative environment you've got. However, look, there's been a few things that have happened. The first of those is for us to spend some good time thinking about the future. And I touched on that in what I said. Because if you start to think about the challenges you're going to face in the future, even from the sheer volume of goods and people coming, it instills in the organisation an understanding that we just can't go on doing it that way. And the other element that brings that reality home is that, again, the one I touched on, that no government's going to fund exponentially just an increase of doing your existing approaches. And so it really was the bringing together of those things and the focus it provided for the organisation that created the momentum to start to look at how we can better develop our risk approaches. And that's essentially it. And once you get to that point of understanding, you start to unleash the thinking that was dormant in other circumstances. But I'm not going to kid you. We've got a long way to go, and indeed some of the things that we realise we need to do will require innovations in technology and others to take us those extra steps.
Thank you, Michael. Let me open it up now.
How important do you think it is for Indonesia to legislate against people smuggling, and what kind of impact could that have on the flow of people movement in Australia's waters? And secondly, we saw reports today of the ACV Triton that it offloaded around 150 asylum seekers at Ashmore Reef so that they could be processed as offshore arrivals. Were these people warned before they got off the boat that would hinder their appeal and processing rights? And is this going to be standard practice for Border Protection Command going forward?
On the first question, obviously when you look at disruption activities in country, including in Indonesia, then that is a matter for the Indonesian authorities. Our agencies can support them with information intelligence. But what it does involve is a crime being committed for those agencies to undertake their activities. And there are many immigration and other crimes that are there at the moment that enable that to occur. Legislating to have a people smuggling crime in itself would obviously facilitate that activity and could well also support possible extradition activities, which of course we do undertake. Look, in relation to the issues on Christmas Island, we don't comment on operational activities. Pretty standard approach from us. We've issued a statement factually saying what occurred on that occasion. That's been reported. Issues of policy or implications are not ours, and I don't intend to go any further than what we've stated at the moment.
Do you think it will help reduce the amount of people intercepted in Australian waters if Indonesia does legislate against people smuggling?
Look, I think people smugglers are like a whole range of other people. They don't, I can't get into their mind, but I don't imagine they'd like being caught and sentenced for things. And to the extent there is a people smuggling crime, then it would be hoped that that would have a salutary impact on their operations.
There's a question here at the back.
Michael, I want to ask you about the accuracy of record keeping program. Your presentation today has been quite strategic and quite outward-looking and quite far-reaching, but something that seems to me to be quite mundane, like record keeping, actually features as a key strategic initiative of your annual plan. I'm just looking to understand what that might be.
Record keeping, one, let's make it as simple as I can. One, there are obligations on agencies to keep records. But two, those records, and we take those, in smiling, I'm taking those seriously. But the second element is that records provide rich information sources. Many things are not new, but people are often new. You know, I came into the organisation new, and having that information available to you and accessible in a way that enables you to draw from experience and knowledge is to me an important issue, quite apart from the statutory requirements, which in themselves are important.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. As I said earlier, Michael has to go off and deal with the pressing issue. But thank you for a very interesting introduction to your area of study, and good luck with the major challenges that are going to be confronting you over the next year. Thank you very much, Michael.